Okay, everybody, welcome back to Set the Standard Season 2. We are into the season now, and we got started. We kicked off with some good topics so far.
Yes.
If you haven't listened to the first couple of episodes of our Season 2, definitely tune into that. And if this is your first time hearing of us, maybe this podcast brought you to us. My name is Genelle, and we have...
Dad.
And we're the hosts of the Set the Standard podcast, the Selden Standard.
Well, we're just giving you a viewpoint, and uniquely from a father-daughter standpoint. And if anything, we encourage parents to have these conversations with their kids of various ages, depending on the topic. But that's part of one of our goals.
Totally. So today's topic, in season 1, we covered, what it was like when I tried a dating app for 30 days. We covered some dating tips in the beginning and kind of how to have certain conversations and communicate. So today's topic was sparked based on a conversation I had with my dad. We've been hiking. It's been snowing. It's been nice. And one of the conversations we had on our hike was difficult questions you should be asking before you get into an engagement or a marriage. And
when the relationship gets more serious,
more serious, right? Because from my standpoint and from my view, I wouldn't just ask this to somebody I was dating because, I don't like to waste my breath. I think when I'm talking to somebody, like I'm not a big small talker. I don't just ask questions to people. I definitely find myself a little more introverted. I like to stay in my house. Even when I'm going to influencer events or events, I really keep to myself. I'm not approaching people, hey, how you doing? And vice versa. I don't like it when people ask me either, because I normally find that I have found in the 7 years I have been going to events and small talking, I would say, I've found that people don't really care. So I tend to just save my breath. I think also when you're dating somebody in the beginning, to ask some of these questions, I mean, unless you're just genuinely curious and with, let's say that relationship doesn't end up anywhere, you just were like, oh, I was just glad I asked just to ask. But for me, when I was just dating a guy or it wasn't, that serious, it was just fun. I didn't ever want to ask these questions because, I didn't see him in that light. Even if you're single, you can listen to this. It's insight into hard discussions you want to have with a future partner that will lead to a more committed, serious standpoint, whether you're going to live together, buy a house together, get engaged, get married, have kids, whatever you're planning to do with a partner, that those are all serious things. And I think a lot of these questions are great to ask. So we're going to talk about that. I guess you could say this is dating part 2 in season 2, but I also just want to say it's a different side of dating. It's a more serious side. So
well, I think one of our missions when we decided to do this podcast was how can we help, people or offer suggestions. And relationships are probably not only friends and siblings, but your relationship you have with your significant other is probably one of the most important relationships you have. And one of the biggest decisions you have is when you progress with that person, ultimately, if you decide to get married. So, I look back in my time, one of my friends was the first to get married, and I think he was like 20, right? And maybe 21. And I look back at that, and I could still see when they got married, and we were so young. It almost didn't seem real that they were actually getting married, but they did. And there's a story there. But I think, when you think about why would you want to ask these questions and then how to ask them, the whole idea there is to do it with the spirit in mind that you're trying to further and deepen the relationship. And so hopefully the person you're asking these of is receptive. Mm-hmm. And if they're not, well, that's an indicator, right off the bat. So I think the key to this before we get into like the actual questions or some sample question ideas is in what areas, hey, is this person someone that you can have these kinds of conversations with and they're receptive to it. If they're not, then you probably need to think about that. You know, need to find out what's going on that they wouldn't want to do that, especially if it's someone that you're thinking about committing your life to. Because I can only tell you from my experience, having been married, that it's not going to get any easier. Life will continue to, as you get married and start having families and stuff, if you can't communicate before that all that comes, you're going to have a hard time later. So first off, I'd stress to you, you know, why are we asking these things is to hopefully get someone's perspective on a lot of the topics, but also that they're very, very receptive. And the how is you want to be in a situation where, you know, you're sitting down, you're both relaxed. Maybe you've already kind of preempted this by saying, hey, I'd like to sit down and have a good discussion with you about some questions.
Even that sounds, I think, you know what I think the best thing is, and where I've found to have my most deep kind of conversations is, you know, if they're still dating and they're still, you know, there's still a courting process. I think over like a cocktail and some, really? Over some food?
Well, I'm not saying you can't discuss.
What about over
I'm
like
not
dinner?
saying you can't. Now, remember, we're segregating dating, and now I'm in this relationship, and we're getting more serious.
So that's where I'm at. I'm currently at. And I think some of my best discussions happen over some food, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. I think.
So I guess the how
or
then,
cooking. You could cook
the
together.
how then is I guess what I'm trying to say is you want to have the undivided attention of the individual.
Oh,
if you're distracted because you're in a restaurant and there's noise and all that, I don't know if it's going to work too well.
Yeah.
If you're at home and you're sitting and whether you're eating some dinner or making dinner, maybe that'd be a less,
That's
you know,
fun.
staring at your phones and stuff.
Yeah, like let's say you're prepping food together and you look over and you're like, where do you see yourself in 3 years?
Sure.
You can, it's kind of makes the conversation, I'm not saying less serious.
Yeah, this isn't like a court where you got someone up on a stand and you're just going to drill down.
Because I
on
think
them.
some people do.
I agree with that.
I think some people do look at these conversations like, oh, I don't want to say, hey, can we sit down and have this convo? Because then everyone's like, oh. And then it also puts pressure on the other person. They want to say the right thing.
I think it's a balance.
I know when someone comes to me and they're like, hey, can we talk? I'm like,
yeah, but you're the way you're framing that, I would agree. I'm just trying to say is
we're like, I think what makes stuff fun in a relationship, especially when it's getting more serious, is being like, you know, let's say the topic of kids gets brought up and then you go, how would you discipline your kids? Like, how'd your parents discipline you? I think those make for fun stories and conversations while you're cooking and eating. Personally. Now, if for you it's worked better where you're like, hey, let's have this conversation with no distractions, no food, no wine or anything like that. Then,
yeah, I think maybe I'm not being clear on.
well, where
how
have
I'm
you
saying
had
it.
conversations like that before?
Let me see if I can do a better job with this. So I think it's ongoing. I do. I think
it's a never ending.
I don't think this is like a one-stop shop. You know, we sit down, we have this conversation, you tell me, I tell you, and we're good. It is, and I'm sure people who are listening to this is like, look, you've been married for 20 years. A lot of things have evolved. I'll use that word.
Right.
As you as a person has and as your situation has.
But I'm talking about in the beginning when you were feeling about getting serious.
I'm saying
the
process can evolve and it can start with a conversation while you're eating a burger and fries.
But how did you start
yours? And then
yours?
it can go on to a scenario where let's sit down and get serious. For example, if you're going to talk about finances with somebody and you're sitting in a bar drinking tequila, I got news for you. It's not going to work.
Right.
You need to be, I want to understand, and this is we're talking when we're in a serious relationship. What's your position on finances? Oh, I want a prenup. What? You want to hear that while you're sitting in a bar having a drink?
I didn't say sit in a bar. I like a nice meal. Yeah.
Or whatever.
Or like, let's say I ask him like, what would be one of our discussions in our finance category is what is the amount that a person should spend that would be before you ask for permission?
Yeah, that's a softball.
Yeah.
Those are softball
yeah,
questions.
Yeah. You're right. I don't think I'm going to have, the guy that I'm dating taking a bite of his taco being like, would you get a prenup?
Let's do a shot. Hey, how many kids do you want?
Well, actually, that does happen. Actually, people do talk like that.
But Is that the right thing to do is the point. So
I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know.
The categories we came up with: finances,
yes,
lifestyle, faith, and kids.
And past family life too.
Yeah, well that can be under, I guess, personal.
Okay.
If you want to get into
and there's
that.
general ones.
Listen, there's a zillion categories and there's a zillion questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're maybe even not totally agreeing on here is, and what we do agree on, is it's important that you have the discussion. When I got married the first time, we went through a Catholic church, and one of the things they had us do was go meet with a couple that were members of the church, and they were older, so I'll say they were in their 50s, and we went to their home, and they were to, I forget what the class was actually called, but when we were in this class, we were meeting with this couple at their home. It was very nice. They gave us these questionnaires, and they sent us into separate rooms, and I'm filling out these questionnaires, and it's some of the questions we'll talk about, but I don't remember. It was like 3 pages of questions. And then they brought us back together, and then we discussed the questions. Now, I would say that's pretty formal in terms of you're in a setting, you have a couple there that are really there to counsel you about marriage and give you tips. They'd been married for, 30 years or whatever. And then they send you out in these questions, and the questions are about money. It's about sex. It's about kids. It's about all that stuff. And then they put you back together in front of them, and you discuss them, and they more or less are telling you, like, let's say you're off base on something or whatever, they kind of guide you. So this scenario was really what we're going to talk about today, but at a lesser amount, is I think if we had to leave you with anything, if you turn the podcast off at this moment, it's having the discussion. And the areas that you're thinking about would be the ones that are obviously part of every marriage, which are finances, which are the possibility, or kids in general, your faith. Those are, and sex. Those are the big ones. And so,
yeah. And I think you can kind of gauge on like what is more serious and what is not. So for instance, I have in the general section, I have, if you could travel to a place, where would you go and why this year? I think you got to make some of that stuff, fun. Obviously, when it comes to finances or asking somebody if they believe in prenups and stuff. Yeah, I don't know if you want to just be sitting at a bar screaming that to each other, out in public. A lot of this stuff can be personal. So I think it just depends on your vibe. I think some of these conversations, this stuff should be fun. I have fun.
Here's an example. So Genelle goes on a date, talk about finances, and it's first date, and the bill comes, and I can't remember the exact story, but you said, I'll get half, and the person said, okay,
no,
fine.
I just put down my card.
You put down your card.
And then they
so
said
in this
nothing.
instance, you could walk away from that scenario and go, man, that person's a tightwad. They didn't pay for dinner.
Yeah.
They wanted me to pay half.
Yeah.
So that's even though you didn't ask the question, there's an indicator, is this person a tightwad? Now, you've since found out that's not the case.
Right.
But it's interesting how you get these glimpses.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to have that. And so when we talked about finances, we're talking about, how do you handle money? Do you have investments? Do you have debt? When you think about being in a marriage, do you have separate bank accounts, joint bank accounts? Mm-hmm. How does all that work?
Right.
Or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And listen, if the person may not have thought about that, I'm thinking we need personal bank accounts. Well, why do you think that? Because that could be a negative, right? Initially, you could be like, oh, you want your separate bank account. Now, one person might make more money than the other, so the person who says, I want a separate bank account, and they just happen to make more money, the other person might think, whoa, you're going to keep all your money to yourself, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Are we going to each pool our money and then pay our bills? These are big. Listen, let me tell you something. You don't talk about this stuff, it's going to come back to haunt you, because this is when it gets real. Is when the bills are coming in, is how are we paying for this stuff?
And think about it, then you'll know these things before you get into like an engagement.
Absolutely. And I'm telling you, and debt, people go into relationships, one person's carrying a lot of debt, and they're expecting the other person to help pay that off. Is that fair? I don't know. You need to talk about it.
Yeah.
If you want to help a person and you say, hey, listen, man, that's okay. We'll figure it out. Your job's doing better. There's a lot of context within that. Initially, if someone said, hey, we're in love, this to get married, I got $100K in debt. Whoa. What's the plan here?
Yeah.
Or, how are we going to, work this out? Well, hey, my job's doing better, whatever. I think in terms of investments, how do they see that,
So if someone isn't the best at communicating, let's say even someone listening to this is like cringing at the idea of just asking these, what kind of, how would you tell them to?
Yeah, I'd go see like a mediator, and it sounds like a heavy term, but
when
like
you're just dating someone?
No. Well, if you're asking me the question, if two people are serious
and they
want to get farther along the path, but they don't want to have these conversations, or one person doesn't, then you're best suited to go do what I mentioned. You go see a someone of faith. Maybe they have a counseling setup. We talked about going on those weekend couples retreats where it's
really cool. My dad even has suggested to me this before in the past. You can literally go, and it's funny. The guy that I'm seeing now, his best guy friend is getting married in April, and I had met them. And when I met them, they were like, "Oh, we went to a retreat for 3 days."
Nice.
And they do it where they have all the guys and all the girls, and they're like, all right, all the men that felt this way about blah, 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 raise your hand in the room. And he's like, wow, I raised my hand during this one thing and I felt like not alone. It teaches you that a lot of people go through the same stuff, and they teach you how to communicate. And you said also how to argue. Did you go to one with both marriages or just the one? Or did you go to one ever?
Yeah, so only thing that I did was that first thing that I mentioned with your mother.
Wait, which one? The Catholic?
Went to the couple's house.
Okay. You and Terry haven't ever done one?
No, what we've done seminars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just little seminars, and surprisingly, even when you're older, there's still a lot to learn around this. I'm telling you right now, relationships are one of the most fulfilling and probably one of the most difficult things you'll do, especially when you're building a family. So that's why we said finances is an important one. And there's so much there we could talk about. But I think the important thing is one of the fun questions, though, I did have around finance, not to come across like some hardcore dude here, but I said to Genelle, this is a fun question. Say to someone about this finance question, if you won the lottery, what would you do with the money? And so the reason that I put that question out there is because it really gives you a perspective of what that person would do. If the first thing they said is, I would go on a 2-week trip to, Australia and live it up or whatever. That doesn't mean that's a wrong answer. I'm just saying if they said that, or if they said something like, I'd pay off all my debt. I would, get a new car or fix my car. I would do this. It gives you a sense to how they view money, how they view finances. This isn't a right or wrong thing.
Right, because people normally, when you ask them those questions, they're like, oh, I would go out and buy a house in the hills.
It's a spending spree.
Yeah, right. I would do this.
Yeah, it's a spending spree.
Yeah.
What if they said, man, the first thing I'd do is I'd help my parents. I would help them, with their house, or I would do this. That's another view into how they think, right? If they said, well, I'd buy a fast car, or, I'd help my brother out. He's, had some things going on in his life. I'd give him some money.
Yeah.
So it kind of...
Wait. So if you won the lottery tomorrow, what would you buy? Or what would you do with the money? First, for top 3 things. Let's just...
I'd buy all my kids a house.
The first thing?
Yep.
That's the first thing you would do?
I would.
First thing?
Yep.
Okay, what's the second thing? And no, wait. Buy them a house wherever they can pick?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes. I mean, currently where you guys are living in your current lifestyle, yeah.
Okay, and then second thing?
Again, assuming there's enough money.
Second thing?
Buy my wife a horse farm.
Okay, yep. And third?
Probably go on a trip. Do something like that.
Nice, I was waiting for you. Where did you go?
What about you?
Wait, where would you go on a trip to?
Oh,
First place.
Yeah, I'd probably go to Europe.
You've always said that.
I want to go.
I'm surprised
now,
you hadn't gone.
Well, now
you
it's
haven't
changed. I'd like to go to where, like, the Roman Empire was and where Greece was, like the original areas of Greece and where all the cathedral, all that stuff, like really like stuff that's 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some of that stuff.
Okay.
I think it'd be pretty cool.
And the weather's pretty nice over there.
I think just being able to go and see where all that, I mean, to go see the pyramids would be a trip. I've heard different things about that. I've heard pros and cons. What about you?
It's funny. I asked this question to someone I was dating. The first thing that I would do is, it's hard because I would start to find someone who could design a home for me, because I would probably build from scratch or find a real estate agent who could find me like a vintage home. And then I would literally scope people out who could bring my visions to life, because I have a lot of visions. So I would do that first. Definitely. I would love to say just buy a home, but it's so much more than that. Mm-hmm. And then I 100% buy a home and then buy myself a new car. Definitely. I like having one car. And then my third one would be definitely going to like it would, get my brothers set up. So, my cousin, anyone who needed anything in my closest immediate whatever, I would just like make sure to take care of that. Cool. I think that'd be kind of cool.
So I think most people have dreamed about, in some ways about that. So it's a good fun question. That's why I threw that out there. So we should move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Which would you like to tackle?
So we can talk about kids, because when we were just in the kitchen before this podcast, it was my dad and my stepmom, and we were talking about discipline. And I think even with friends, and if maybe you've had this conversation, how you were disciplined as a kid. Everyone kind of has that in their mind, how their parents handled them, if you had any parents, because that's a whole nother form of discipline. Some people's parents disappeared after a while, and you had to discipline yourself and figure that out. So I think something important when you're going into something serious, I think you always dream of having a family, for the most part, with someone you really love. I've been in relationships since I was 14, and I will say that I always thought about families with the person that I really cared about. So it does cross your mind, even from a young age, that fantasy, that love story. So one of those things is, when you have kids, you have to realize that kids are a little crazy sometimes. And you have to discipline them in a way where it can teach them how to, clean up after themselves, not speak in a certain way to you or to authority, and all these things. So let's jump into kids.
Well, I mean, we kind of got right into sort of
Well, how many do you want to have?
Yeah, kids is there's people today who we have someone in the family that married somebody who said, I don't want children, and they agreed to that. They said, okay, I don't want children. Didn't have children. And they were later in their life. They hadn't been married. They got married a little later, married this person, and now today they wish they would have, right? Yep. So they're divorced and so on. So why? That's probably beyond marrying and making a commitment to marry somebody. Having children is probably the biggest. Finances will come and go, and you'll have times where it's really good, not so good. There's a lot of things that can happen there. Once you decide that you want a child, man, it's not like getting a dog and you get sick of the dog, you take it to the pound. Mm-hmm. You have a child, you're committed for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not, I always thought at 18 I'd be done. I'd be like, all right, they're 18. It's over for me. Oh, boy, did I.
Well, you also added in 2 others too.
Yeah, well, that's right. So this part of the conversation it's really interesting. And typically people who come from, a family and they had brothers or sisters or whatever, that can kind of orient their decision, right? They could base it on, well, I didn't get along with my brothers or this or that, and this brother was that, and my sister, man, and that. But generally speaking, people who come from families and have a significant or a sibling or what have you, generally they look at that experience as sort of one of the ingredients to make their decision. So take that. Now you meet someone and they were an only child.
Right. I have a friend that was.
Right.
Yeah.
So their vision of children and having children could be different than the person who came from a family of 3 or 4.
Could be different, but
not necessarily a bad thing.
But you know what's funny is I have a friend that's an only child. She wanted to have a child. She did. Where I have a friend that comes from a very European family and she has a brother and all this stuff. She doesn't want any kids.
Interesting.
So it's you know what I mean? It's so.
And you can change your mind on that, but it's important up front to know kind of where the person's head's at. Like, this world's terrible. I don't want to have kids. Oof. Well, okay. Is that a reason? Oh, they're so expensive. Is that, I don't want to give up my career. So when you start hearing things like that, which I'm not trying to criticize someone who makes those statements. What I'm saying, though, if you're on the other side of that going, well, I really, I think I gave you an example today, this couple that we knew years ago before they got married, the woman said, I want to have 6 kids. And the husband was like, why do you want to have 6 kids? She goes, I just want a big family.
Well, he wasn't a husband yet, right?
And they got married and had 6 kids.
Wow.
And, it's fun talking to him. All the kids are older now, but it is fun talking to him about all the moving parts. I can't remember all the kids' names. I always laugh. 3 of them are married and so on and so forth. People who come from those scenarios sometimes go in that same direction because they look at that time of their life as a kid growing up with older brothers, sisters, whatever. Some go, too much. I don't want that.
And you know what? Isn't it funny? Is you came from 3.
Correct.
My mom came from 3.
Yep.
And you guys ultimately had 3.
It is funny.
That's really
sometimes,
funny.
Again, that can dictate. You could say the same with Terry. She came from 2.
But do you think, let's say you're going into a serious relationship. Let's just take me, for example. Let's say I'm thinking about, going further and being engaged. And let's say I am like, I want to have at least 2 to 3. And the guy that I'm dating is like, I really don't want any. What would you advise somebody to do? Let's say that they're hitting everything else on agreement, but it's
Well, as I mentioned, that's a big one. So if you have your heart set on, so if the person is dead set on no children,
do you think that they should stick along and hope that mind will change?
No.
Okay.
I think that, and I'm guessing that person who says they don't want children has a reason. And those are what you have to listen to. Why? Well, so many kids are abused, or, there's so many kids that are.
What if they're like, I don't want the responsibility?
Then again.
Yeah. It shows a little bit about them.
Yeah, because
and that's why we have a note. We have a whiteboard underneath our setup here. We have a note that says monthly check-ins over dinner. And recently I've been doing this with the person that I'm dating on these, not all these topics, but on the ones where we want to touch in to make sure that we're still on the same page with certain discussions. Monthly check-ins with somebody leading up as you're like, let's say the person doesn't want to have kids and you do. You can still for sure go on dating, but let's say the person's like, hey, I want to get engaged soon. Like, what do you think? Check in with them on the things that you found that you would disagree or there was of concern. So I think that's the money and the kids is a big thing, along with the last point. Faith, yeah.
I would consider probably the most important one would be the faith.
Yeah, your number one.
And maybe should have covered that first, but this would really play into the other 2 quite a bit in terms of, how you handle your finances and also how, if you're going to have children, how you would raise them. And so I think having a discussion about that, were they exposed to some kind of religion or, sharing your thoughts on it. I know people oftentimes, friends have done this, get married. Actually, I did this in my first marriage as well. You come from I was a Catholic. That's what I would say. And so was your mother. And so it was kind of like, Okay, well, let's get married in a Catholic church. We didn't even really go to the church. And so,
Oh, not every Sunday?
no,
Oh.
no, we weren't practicing.
So
if you
what
will.
made you
So it
choose?
was later that we started our journey towards being Christians, which was
Oh.
a different discussion. But it's an important part. I think looking at it today through a different lens than I did when I was younger, I would almost tell you it's almost mandatory
to be on the same page?
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
it just creates a scenario where there's a common denominator in many things and decisions that you make.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
I agree. You know, I have had a long-term relationship, and then I tried dating for the fun of it, aka for the learning aspect and meeting people, right? I had never done that in high school and college. So I kind of got into that. And when I really got into dating with intention, that's what we call it nowadays in our late 20s, early 30s, I right away brought up, you know, my faith and where I kind of was. Pretty much even with the guys that, you know, were actors or whatever, I would bring up faith probably first or second date. Just because I think even aside from dating somebody, I think even friendships sometimes you can bump heads if you think a lot of like differences in your kind of, because think about it, if you're hanging out even with friends and they're doing stuff that you don't agree with or you're involved with. So I think it's super important to align with a partner. Obviously take friends out of it. I have friends that are all different. You know, I have. And I will say the friendships that did fall apart, none of it was based on faith. So isn't that interesting? So I think none of those things came between us. However, I think with a partner, if you are living with that person, you are one, or you get married and you become one, I definitely think that's where faith, because some people do say, I'm seeing somebody and he has a friend who the girlfriend is a Christian and he's an atheist. So
Those are two extremes.
well, I mean, someone who believes in God and then someone who doesn't believe in
That's
God.
what I'm saying. Those are two extremes.
Yeah. But I think, you know, it's important in a relationship because then if you are one and you're making decisions together on morals and values, some people would say, well, as long as you're a good person, you know, isn't that the common denominator to all decisions and how you raise kids and stuff? And I would say, you know, yes, but also when it comes to help teaching your kids where your moral values come from, where do your values come from? And my values came from, my dad wasn't just like, hey, be a good person. It was the idea of God and following, being more like Jesus in your life, to live as a sin-free life as you can, so you can ultimately, you know, live in
And your grandmother
life.
was
Yeah. So I think when you're instilling that in kids, and let's say you're like, oh, well, I never want to have kids, I just want to be married. Well, you know, if you want to go to church or you want to do whatever for the way that you believe or whatever, and then the other person is like, oh, I want to go to church, or oh, I want to worship the universe, or I want to, you know, have people do a lot of the stones. The rocks. What's that called?
crystals.
The crystals. You know, maybe they're
Tarot
like,
cards.
yeah, maybe they can keep that separate. I just think, you know, it's important for me. I like someone who I can share my faith with. Maybe people, you know what, look at faith as like, this is my own thing. This is my own separate own thing.
But when you raise a child, though, which is it going to be?
Because would you say,
Right? If one person says, well, I don't believe in any God, and this person says, well, I believe in God, how are we going to raise our kid?
well, did your dad ever talk about God?
No, we're Catholics.
Well, but did he?
Again, it was very...
But they made it work. They had a marriage that...
Oh, between my mom and dad.
Yeah.
Well, I think...
like, how would you... What would you say
I want to remember,
to that?
I think dad was a Catholic and mom wasn't. I think mom became a Catholic actually, or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in order to get married in the Catholic Church, they had to be Catholic. Now, were they practicing? Not necessarily.
Did you find growing up with your parents, did one, open the Bible and read it and the
Now,
other didn't?
But
or?
here's what they did. Now I remember. So I went to catechism, which was a Catholic
Interesting.
education,
It
and
is,
so
yeah.
then I went through the process.
Yeah.
I don't know that I finished it. It was some point I got to, and then my parents, I think we moved or something, and that was it. Never once again. And then when I got involved in seeking out God, and just really more out of curiosity, I would go and talk with my mom and dad about it. But that's another discussion. So I think as it relates to back to building a relationship, go from dating to now seriousness, and you're considering areas of importance. You could even throw politics in here because it's so much of our lives today.
Oof.
But really,
that's funny. I tend to keep politics separate from it. See, that's more of a thing I keep to myself.
yeah.
What do you think about? What do you think?
I don't know.
Do you think politics and faith kind of go hand in hand?
Well, I think some people do. I think
Okay.
you have to. I wouldn't put that as a priority.
Right.
However, if someone,
Like, let's say
it's become very divisive.
Let's say there
in our
was
current
a
situation.
Let's say there was a couple and they were like, "All right, I'm going to vote Biden and I'm going to vote Trump." Would you say that relationship wouldn't work?
That can cause problems. I don't have that situation.
Okay.
But
I just wondered.
It could.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's some strong feeling clearly about
But
that.
do you think it would cause more turmoil to have someone be a Christian and someone be an atheist?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. I believe so too. I just wondered
Well,
if you
again,
thought
as I
about
mentioned, when
Yeah.
you go to raise your kids, what if the atheist says, I want to raise them an atheist, and the Christian goes, I want to raise them a Christian?
Well, what if someone goes, "I want to raise them what Donald Trump believes and I want to raise them what Biden believes?"
Well,
Yeah.
again,
Yeah,
politics.
you're right.
yeah.
You're right.
So
This is just good discussion. I just like having this because I think a lot of people, especially this is election year, a lot of people are going to have that pressure again between friends.
Well, we'll have a podcast on that because I think it's worth talking about.
Okay.
And it is, if you turn on your news or flip through your phone or whatever,
Yeah.
there's always something on there about it.
That's
and
why I
so
don't watch it.
And people have formed opinions. Some of it is not looking at all the information that's in front of them otherwise. Similar to what we're talking about here is that we're just giving you a small glimpse as to some ideas that you should consider
Yeah.
if you're moving forward with someone to, get married.
Yeah.
That these would be questions you want to go over. I think finances, I think your faith, general lifestyle.
Yes.
There's so many great questions and
Yeah.
and ways you can have this conversation, how to have it. So
And what's really nice too is this is just like a tip of advice. Live your life for you, and ultimately you'll attract in like-minded people. So I found that with my lifestyle of being like kind of in my health and wellness, I initially right off the bat was talking about health, wellness, supplements, and working out and being outside and that type of motivation. Right off the bat, I was living my life through finding a better relationship with Jesus. So I found that it was almost uncontrollable. I was talking about it within the first, second date, my religion, my viewpoint. I remember I was seeing someone at the beginning of 2023, and I remember bringing up that I was Christian, and his friend was sitting across from me, immediately started just poking at all of that. So I think live your life the truest to yourself. So if you're lazy and you hate working out, then live that and be that. So that way you'll attract people who also don't. I have a friend who doesn't work out at all. She hates working out. She doesn't even really go on walks. And she has a partner who does the same thing. So really just be true to yourself. And then as you get deeper and more serious and become intense with somebody and you want to take it to the next level, moving in, engagement, marriage, these things then will flow. And it won't be this like, when should I bring up finances, right? Because you've already kind of been yourself and true to yourself. And I'm true to myself. I like nice things. I spend money. I like to go on trips. The person I'm seeing very much so knows that. So then when we do go to talk about money and doing trips together, he can be like, hey, so how do you normally budget this? Or, when you're going on these trips, like, is it always have to be extravagant? So that way it flows better too. So it's not always this like, let's have this intense conversation about all these faith, kids, lifestyle and finances. So anyways, I like this discussion. I like sitting down with my dad and having these discussions because I'm in a point in my life where I was dating casually, dating serious, thinking about my life, moving to the next level. And these questions are questions that are actually very relevant in my life.
Well, they all these, as we put a bow on this one, all these play a role in throughout your entire relationship. So if you envision marrying someone and you're married to them for 40, 50, 60 years, whatever, finances, faith, lifestyle, those things are always, kids, those are always in play. They're always in play.
Yeah.
And so if you don't start off, I think if you're in really completely opposite directions, it's hard. I just would say it that way. So
totally. And you want to make your life is hard. I have been around and you want to make your life as smooth and easy as possible. There will always be bumps.
Good luck with that.
Well, yeah, but I would say, life has been pretty smooth if you stay true to yourself and you think about these questions. And honestly, the roof on all of this is communication. So just figure out the ways to be a great communicator and be open and just open arms about it. Communication is number one. So thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast. We'll see you guys in our next one. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Over and out.